Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thursday Afternoon Live with Cobuzz. We have a really neat show for you today. Our special guest is going to be Bill Schnee, award-winning, Grammy-winning master producer and engineer. And we're going to be talking about just the production of music and what happens, and why 24 bits is better than 16, and why 24 bits, if you take it to its nth degree, is theoretical. But we've had some really wonderful conversations over the last few weeks, and just gotten to know Bill, and what a fascinating individual he is. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Cobuzz. I'm David Solomon. I'm our chief high-res music evangelist. That's the title I was given when we first started, and I sure am enjoying this title and the music I get to bring to hundreds of thousands of people every day. Please join us on our social. We're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. This is being streamed live to just hundreds of places right now, so lots of people will be able to enjoy Bill's talk today. With Cobuzz, we offer 50 million, somewhere around 50. At this point, I think it's even getting closer to 60 million cuts, all in at least 1644, but going all the way up to 24,192 in resolution. So the quality is amazing. You can do all this for about $15 a month. Or we just started a family plan that will allow you to do this with your whole family for about $25 a month. It includes 6 people. So just for a little more than $4 per month, if you are the one who really enjoys, the ultimate quality in music, you're basically turning your kids onto it for almost nothing. And I can tell you, once you listen to high res for any amount of time, at that point, if you try to go back, it's really kind of hard. You start realizing the emotion that high resolution recordings can give you. So we're really happy about the family plan that you can get into for $25. Just to tell you a little bit about the show today, we're going to have obviously our main speaker, Bill Schnee, on. But we're also going to have Sujan Hong on about halfway through the show. Sujan is our music merchandiser, and knows probably more about music than anybody I know. She's just got this in-depth knowledge of music in every genre, and she's fascinating to listen to. A few weeks ago, I guess this was maybe a couple of months ago now, in our corporate meetings, Sujan was telling us all about what's coming up tomorrow, and it just kind of hit me. I'm going, Sujan, would you please start doing the show with me so that we're not the only ones that get the advantage of having your knowledge base? So she's agreed to do that. So Sujan will be on in just a little while, and I think we're calling that section the music desk. But right now, let's welcome our main guest on. We're going to welcome Bill Schnee to the show. Bill, hello. How are you?
Good. I'm great.
Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
It has been an absolute pleasure getting to know you. I can't tell you the last time I had this good of a time having a conversation with anyone. The first time Bill and I spoke, we were about 2.5 hours in. Both of us were in a belly laugh, and I happened to look up and notice that I had been taking this much of this guy's time. But that was just one of the most fun conversations. So yeah, thanks, Bill. Really happy to have you on the show. Primarily, I mean, the way this whole thing started was a friend of ours introduced us, Tim Maritani.
Right.
What a great guy. And I certainly appreciate the introduction. So how are you doing?
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
As well as anyone can do in a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, if you don't know Bill, he's probably one of the most famous producer / recording engineers that's alive today. He's made so many albums and helped make so many albums that we all know, and we'll be talking about some of these as time goes on. But I remember starting Hi-Fi, the one that Neither just showed, the the very first one, Pressure Cooker. I think that was like in every hi-fi shop in the world when it was that. But just take a look at some of these albums that this guy has helped produce and record, and making them some of the most widely listened to albums in the world, especially with us audiophiles. So, Bill, kudos. Thank you very much, not only for doing this, but for producing such unbelievable music in the past, something that we could always go to, that we knew that, okay, we need something that sounds great so that we can show what these speakers or this amplifier or how this gear is performing. You need something that kind of really sounds like music. And you were one of the first guys that we could just always go to, pick up an album. And it didn't matter what Bill Schnee album it was, we would pick out one and it would always sound fantastic.
Thank you. It's very kind. Maybe a little too kind. I don't know, but whatever. Yeah, I came from hi-fi. I was 13 when I discovered hi-fi and started listening to speakers and everything, and put all that together. And it was funny because back then, not very many engineers got credit, but there was this one guy, Al Schmidt, that got credit. And because one of the artists I was attracted to was Henry Mancini, and it always was engineered by Al Schmidt. And it was great to, let's see, that was whenever, about 10 years later, I got to meet Al, and we've since become very, very good friends. I've known Al for almost 45 years now. I've been very blessed. I've had an incredible career, as has Al. I was 3 years old when Al got in the business. He's 92 now and still cooking. And so that's the benchmark that I'm after. My line has always been, I want to go out dropping dead on the console. Guys, I think one more, just a little. That's my dream. So
just one more tune.
Just one more take. Just one more take. The final take. And
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's it. Go on.
Yeah. So tell me how you got started in this whole thing to begin with. I mean, I know you were in hi-fi. I was as well, but I think both of us kind of came into this in maybe a similar way. I was in bands my whole life, and I think you did the same thing, right? Before you ever even started recording, you were a musician.
Right. I started on trumpet in grade school, and that didn't last long. And then I went to sax. That lasted a little bit longer. My poor parents, with the sound of a duck in heat. I know this now because our middle son took the saxophone for a while, and that. And then ended up taking keyboard lessons and playing the organ. And my parents moved to Southern California from San Francisco on my senior year of high school. And I met some guys that were starting a band. And I said, do you think an organ would fit in? And they said, let's try it. So we got together and we started writing songs and doing things that bands did back then, playing in teen clubs and at bowling alleys and wherever anyone would pay you or almost pay you even to play. And we went to a real recording studio, well, sort of a real recording studio, and did some demos of our songs that we'd written. And somebody's mother knew somebody who knew someone that was in the record business. And that somebody was Gary Usher, who actually was very close with the Wilson family and actually wanted to be in the Beach Boys. But in fact, he wrote 409 and In My Room with Brian. But he had a deal, with MCA, and he signed us to Decca Records. And we went into Capitol, Studio B, and recorded our first singles. And he brought in a guitarist to augment the band named Richie Podler, phenomenal musician. So we put out our singles. Those were the days, you did 4 songs. If you got a hit, you ran in and cut 6 more and put an album together. There is no LA Teens album. Yes, LA Teens, I know. Talk about thinking of longevity in our minds. And that's where it started. So when we got dropped, Richie had built a new studio, his third actually, and I went over to visit him, and he said, "You guys are great. I can get you a record deal. I'm working with this guy, Mike Curb. He's going to go places. Go, go see him." And so I went and saw Mike and signed another deal with him, where our parents still had to sign because we were not 18. And so we had recorded at Capitol and United, Western United, the best studios in Hollywood in 1964. And when I went into Richie's little studio, we did our first track, came into the control room and looked up at those 604 speakers and heard the track we had just cut that came out of there. I'd never heard anything like that. It was so much more emotional than anything I'd heard in those other great studios. And it was an instant aha moment. I turned to him and I said, "Can you teach me how to do all this?" And he said, "No, I'm teaching Cooper. Get out there and do another take." So that's what we did. But that was the moment I knew I wanted to know how to do that, because that was right when I realized that sound can add to the emotional quality of music more than I ever thought. And it was brought home because it was our own band, that kind of thing. So that's where it got started. And he wouldn't teach me. So when our next record deal fizzled, I found a little studio near where we were living, a little kind of Mickey Mouse studio. And I went and told the guy, I said, "If you teach me how to operate the equipment, I'll sweep the floors, I'll do whatever it takes." And he said, "Sure." And he taught me everything he knew. And the next day, he didn't know very much, and he knew what he knew wasn't right anyway. It was mostly wrong. But that was the start. And without tearing it into too longer, I'll just say that the most amazing thing was my background was in math and science. I actually started college as in aerospace, and that only lasted a day. And then I switched to business. But after the band, the LA Teens, got signed, after the first semester, I quit college because we're going to be stars. They told us so. And ultimately, after 2.5 years, I would go back to college with my tail between my legs and study hard, only to as I advanced in recording, it didn't take long at all because of the background and where the music and the math and science, engineering just came naturally to me. I was very fortunate to have an incredible mentor, Toby Foster, a guy that believed in me and who was an excellent engineer in all phases, including maintenance. That's how he started. But he's an excellent orchestra engineer, taught me everything I know about recording orchestras. And so it was great. I was back in college by then, and I would come after college. He was working in a studio, and I would go there and just start asking question after question after question. What's a dynamic mic again compared to a condenser? Oh, and then a ribbon. Oh, and all these questions. And he was very patient, and he just would go as long as he wanted, as he could take it. And then he said, "All right, go home. I'll see you tomorrow." So
yeah, at this point there were no really formal schools that taught people how to.
Honestly, the schools are second best, because the old way was really the best. Was to be able to work, was to like England did it really right, where they would start a guy as a T-boy, just who you get to walk into the control room and look around as he was passing the tea out to the session, and then they work their way up to being a second engineer. And then they go in the mastering room and learn how to master LPs, because you had to know that, because there were a lot of limitations with the LP that you had to know when you were recording, and ultimately work their way into, in the meantime, now a second engineer, and now they could watch all the masters working and figure out how they all do it, to figure out how they want to do it. Schools are the only thing we have now, because the business is not what it once was, unfortunately. But some of the schools are very good at giving them a good base to launch from. Of course, it's funny these days. Most kids, I've talked to schools, and you go in, and these guys are, it depends, anywhere from 18 to 28 or something, the average ones. And but there isn't one 18-year-old that doesn't have his own DAW at this point. Doesn't have his own hard drive system to record. They're already doing it. So, and that's good and bad, because de facto engineering is not exactly the way to go. So I'm glad they go to school and get some kind of proper knowledge as opposed to figuring it out on their own, let alone the worst thing of all is going online and trying to learn. Because, online is wonderful. There's so much information, but unfortunately in a lot of areas, recording engineering might be one, there's almost more misinformation. So it's tough. Anyway, I got to get back on point. In just 2.5 years from the time the LA Teens were with Richie Podler, cutting that track that moved me so much, I had learned enough and was good enough that and persistent enough that I was able to talk him into giving me a job. And he finally, I begged for 2 months, and he finally said, all right, there's a demo tomorrow morning for publishing. Come in and do that. In those days, that's where you'd go in and in 3 hours, you'd cut 3 or 4 songs with the songwriter with a small rhythm section. He'd put a vocal on it. You'd do a quick mix, and they'd make their little discs that they would send around to record companies or producers or artists to see if they get their song recorded. So it was a Screen Gems publishing demo, and I did it, and everything went fine. I called Richie. I said, what did they say? They said you were great. I said, okay, what now? He said, well, there's one tomorrow for Warner Brothers. Come in again in the morning and do that one. Okay. So I went and did that one. Asked him that afternoon, what'd they say? They said you were great. Okay. Next, he said, yeah, come in tomorrow night and record 3 Dog Night. I said, oh, huh? 3 Dog Night was his biggest act. He was only engineering. He would go on to produce the lion's share of their records. But at that point, Gabriel Meckler was producing 3 Dog Night and Steppenwolf. And Gabriel was Richie's biggest client. And try to figure out why he would throw in a young 23-year-old, 22 maybe, 20, I don't remember what time of year it was, punk in with his biggest act. They were on their second album. They'd already had a hit. And they were on their second album on their way to being one of the biggest bands in the country. And so I went in, scared spitless, and did cut a track with them. They were very nice to me. Everything went great. I called him up next morning. What'd Gabriel say? He said, you were great. Okay, what now? Do another one. Okay. And again, cut another track. And again, yep, keep going. Third night, I got in trouble. I got a track started, and they asked for an effect I didn't know how to do. So I had to call Richie, and he came down and bailed me out. But that was the beginning. And it was one of those, funny enough, thrown in the deep end of the pool, and I managed to swim.
What an incredible time for music. What an incredible time to be coming up in music. I was a little younger at that point, but I can tell you, I mean, everything that you were doing, we were still going, oh my God, this is incredible stuff. So wow, working with those guys must have been an experience that one of those experiences that you'll never forget. Oh
yeah, for sure. And then, now I had a job there, and I was doing the other clients. In those days, you would set up and tear down. So there would be a daytime session and a nighttime session. So he usually would work at night with whoever he was working with and go late into the night. And I did the daytime sessions. And one of the bands I worked with, I think you have a group called Smith. You have the album cover you showed me.
Yeah. Pull that up, Neetha, if you would. Yeah. This is such a fun album too. I was just listening to this whole album last night, actually.
So I came in on the middle of this album and finished recording it, and I mixed the single, which was a Burt Bacharach song, "Baby It's You."
Oh man, that's the one. That is the song off this album.
Yeah, and it became a big hit, top 10 at least. And so I had the mix. I was done with the mix, and I said, what do I do now? And Richie said, you go to 6035 Hollywood Boulevard and you hand it to Doug Sachs, and he will master it.
So this is how you met Doug?
Yep.
Great. There's some questions out here. I just want to let our audience know that we will have tons of questions here. Some of them we're going to get to. I'm already looking at some going, I know that this is going to come up. So please continue to ask questions. If we don't happen to get to it during our time together, Bill and I will go back and we'll answer these questions for you. So yeah, keep answering. There's just some great questions coming up here already around Bravura Records and Doug Sax and a lot of the stuff, but we'll get to as much of this stuff as possible. And hey, if we don't get to everything, we're going to have Bill back because he is, as you can tell, kind of a fascinating guy. So go ahead, Bill.
Anyway, that was my introduction to Doug. He loved the way the record sounded, which honestly was much more due to Bill Cooper, who had recorded it, than it was to my mix, I think. But whatever. And we kind of hit it off right away. And so that was the beginning of my relationship with Doug, who I call Richie. I say I have three mentors. Richie Podler, who was the inspiration for sure. And then when I went to work there, after my ill-fated night with Three Dog Night, that was the end of my tracking on that album. But I did do overdubs sometimes, and I did hang out all the time watching every move Richie made. So I'm learning as much as I possibly could from a master. And then Toby, I mentioned, is my second mentor. And then a little later in life, Doug Sax would become my third mentor. And but I think, you know, this audience, I hope, is obviously the bulk of them being interested in high quality and in music, which obviously I'm totally been into. Doug actually, I'll tell you, I'll lead into Sheffield. Doug actually, there was a recording studio behind the mastering lab. It was actually owned by Mike Curb. When I did the deal with Mike Curb after, I didn't tell you, but Richie, we cut that one track that inspired me was the aha moment. And that was all we ever did. They got in a fight, Richie and he got in a fight, and that was the end. And so I went to Mike Curb and I said, now what? He said, well, I've got a studio. And that's when the brash little kid goes, well, why don't I produce the band? And he went, okay, we can try that. And so he had this studio that at the time, that right behind where the mastering lab would be built. This is back now in about 66 when the band's recording there. And Doug hasn't built his studio in front, but in the same building. And so we recorded in that studio. So now jumping to 69, Doug tells me about the studio that's going in the back and how good it is. And he recorded a direct-to-disc record to promote the mastering lab is all it was. It was the idea to show how good mastering could sound. And of course, for those of you that don't know, the whole idea of a direct-to-disc record, it's as far as quality goes, is a normal record back then would be recorded on multi-track analog tape and then mixed down to a 2-track analog tape. That means that the music from the microphones went through the console onto the tape, and then from the tape onto the console again to be mixed. And then that tape, the 2-track tape, would be mastered onto the lacquer disc that made the LPs. So going direct to disc eliminated 2 generations of analog tape and another pass through the electronics on the console. And one of the first things I learned from Doug is that in analog, not digital, but in analog, less is definitely more. The less electronics you have, the more pure, clean sound you're going to have. And tape, which that would be a whole show in itself, tape, which has a sound of its own, and it added noise, it added, compression, certain kinds of distortion. If you recorded at a higher speed, like 30 IPS, the top end was pretty silky, but the bottom end wasn't as focused and solid. If you recorded at 15 IPS, the bottom end would be solid, but the top end wasn't as silky. It couldn't take high.
What kind of machines were you using back then, Doug? Bill?
What?
What kind of machines were you using? What kind of tape machines were you using?
Well, the Ampex kind of owned the show. Ampex and Scully. Scully was a great sounding machine. Ampex and Scully in 69, 70 was everything. But that studio, so so they went again right to the disc, and he printed up I don't know how many records, and they were sitting in the lab, and he would hand them out to anyone that wanted one. Like I said, so and he had a partner named Lincoln Mayorga, who's an excellent musician, and the album was basically Lincoln's arrangements of songs. And so 69, then they did another one in 71. And by then I'd become good friends with Doug, and I was feeling my oats, and I was hoping he'd let me try it, but he didn't. But then they did another one in 73, and that one he asked me to do. That would be Lincoln Mayorga Distinguished Colleagues, Volume 3. And
yeah, I think Neetha's got that pulled up right now. You mind throwing that up on screen, Neetha?
And that's it.
Yeah, we've got all these, by the way, on Qobuz. We pulled most of these straight up. I think this one's on there anyway, but that
was the first one, and it was, they are astounding. Like, for a normal recording session back then, you spent 90% of your 10% of your time in pre-production and 90% of the time in the studio. On a direct-to-disc record, you spend 90% of the time in pre-production, getting everything ready to go.
Right, because there's only like one take, right? There's no overdubs. It's got to be live and straight to disc, correct?
It's one take of the entire side of the album. Song 1, Song 2, Song 3. Yes. And you can't mix, you have to take a whole side as the master. And
could you imagine that happening today?
Oh yeah, some people are doing them. They're doing them. They're still doing. I'd love to do it today.
Well, there's nothing like having all the musicians in a room together. I
Right.
mean, as a musician, this as well. It's one thing putting on a set of cans and playing to whatever everybody else is playing to. Totally different when you're, looking at the person and you get those body cues. There's no comparison, in my opinion.
Right. Like I always say, playing with and off everybody. Yeah, that's exactly right. And today, I'd say easily 75% records start with a click. And a lot of them are put together, manufactured by people that in some cases don't even see each other. They're done from all different, people's houses, sometimes studios, but a lot of things that's all assembled. And it's, I'm not necessarily against that, but there's nothing like the synergy of human beings playing together. So
I think we were talking about this. We were either talking about it or I read it not too long ago, but it's the whole idea that these days you start at 108 BPM, beats per minute, you finish at 108 BPM. There's no, going to 107, and when things get a little excited, maybe a $110 or a $112. Which really did happen on a lot of the albums early on.
And to that point, the whole idea of perfection is to me is completely blown out of proportion. As far as what you're talking about, one of my favorite bands ever was Earth, Wind and Fire, and they've got a couple of big hits one of them that starts like at 106 and ends up at 118 or something. Well, maybe not quite that, but it races. And who cares? They all got excited, and
it's human.
There's excitement in that. There can be excitement in that if everybody starts building, and they'll take you with them.
Yeah, and this isn't really what we're here to talk about, but I feel the same way about autotune in a lot of cases because, way back when, before the whole autotune craze hit, I enjoyed the imperfections and whatever was going on. From time to time, you'd hear a half sent off note. It's like, it's okay. We're human beings. We're not, we're not digital beings.
Yeah. My line, humans, we're making music for humans to listen to. Maybe if we're making music for computers or robots to listen to, it'd be a different thing. But, excuse me, I can, one of my favorite singers, R&B singers, was Teddy Pendergrass. And he's got some things where he was almost a half step flat, and it's with such passion that and I noticed that it was flat, but so what? He was pleading at that point, and he didn't make it. So what? And I maintain that the average person doesn't doesn't care that much about, being a little bit off tune, out of key, a little bit up or down. We all do. I coined this thing in the 70s where I was saying to somebody, you know what? We don't make records for the people that buy them. We make records for each other. It's sort of like we're trying to all impress our peers more than the people at home. And, I've really tried to hold on to that. The idea of, as I put in my book, I try to go for music, not for performance, not perfection.
Well, we're I cannot believe we're kind of halfway through this thing that we had planned. There's a real good chance that this is going to go over. And if it does, hope you hang with us. And if you can't, totally understand. When we come back, I'm going to start pulling up some of the albums, starting with Pressure Cooker. I really want to talk about that album, and then we'll go into some of the Steely Dan stuff that you've done, and have a little more conversation around the process and how you record and what makes the biggest differences to you these days. So we're going to break for a few minutes and bring on our music merchandiser, Sujan Hong, and we'll talk to Bill in just a few minutes. Bill, stand by and we'll be right back with you, okay?
Okay.
All right, everyone. We've got our music merchandiser, Sujan Hong, coming up. And as I had said to begin with, she is a fascinating young lady. She knows more about, she's probably forgotten more about music than most of us will ever know. But how are you doing, Sujan? Come on in.
Hey, David.
Hey, young lady. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
We missed you last week.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there.
No problem at all.
But I'm here this week.
Yeah. And you had you were didn't you take a little vacation or something last week?
Well, I took 2 days off, which in 2020 I guess counts as a vacation.
Well, especially for you, since you there is no way that anytime that the rest of the team is going, oh, it's Friday afternoon, it's time to kind of go off. Sujan is going, yeah, well, this is when my big days start. So she's always working really, really hard on Friday. So Sujan, tell us about some music that we got coming up this week.
Yeah. The music has not let up. It's another great week of releases. Can't see live shows, but we can hear a lot of great music. And we're going to kick off with our album of the week, which is Nubia Garcia's Source. So this is Nubia Garcia's debut album. It is also our latest Cobuzzy Seam. So Cobuzzy Seam, you may have seen it throughout the service from time to time. It's an honor we bestow on an exceptional first or second album from an artist across all genres. So Garcia is a saxophonist and composer who, is a big part of this really exciting British jazz scene that just, keeps giving us so many great players and music. You might also know her from her work with the experimental collective Naria. Also from the UK, they released an excellent album called Bloom last year, which you should check out. So at Source, Garcia is also taking from all these different genres and styles and, just pushing forward. So really excited about this one. And this is coming out on Concord Jazz, and we'll have it in 2496. Next up, we have The Lemon Twigs, Songs for the General Public. So Songs from the General Public, for the General Public, is the third album from the Lemon Twigs. They are these two brothers, Michael and Brian Daddario. They grew up on Long Island. They acted on Broadway, from a young age. I think their father is also a Broadway actor. And as the Lemon Twigs, they are, they're theatrical, they're impish, they're campy. And even though they're just in their 20s, they sing and dress like children of the 70s. They've got these, Faces era Rod Stewart haircuts. And the main thing is that they really know how to write a great power pop song. So this one is out on 480 tomorrow, also in 2496. Up next, we have Bully with Sugar Egg. Bully is mainly this woman, Alicia Bugnano. She is a Nashville musician. She's also an audio engineer who has worked at Steve Albini's Studio Electrical Audio. So she's got a voice you could probably compare to like a raw, more feral, like Juliana Hatfield, or maybe a more refined version of the late Kim Shattuck of the Muffs. Or maybe you could make the comparison to another blonde singer who released music on the same label several decades earlier, Kurt Cobain. It growls and it claws its way around and against these like buzzing and crashing guitars throughout this her third album. Really exciting listen. A band that I cannot wait to see live once we're back to being able to see live shows again. This comes out on Seattle Sub Pop label, and this is also in 2496. And then our fourth new release pick of the week is the Mavericks on Espanol. So this is their first ever Spanish language album, and this is a band that started their career in Miami, Florida, back in 1991. They've broken up a couple times, took hiatuses, but throughout they've always straddled this rock and country thing. And this is a mix of originals and covers, including songs by Julio Iglesias, his son Enrique, also Juan Gabriel, and it's all carried by the powerful voice of leader Raul Mato. And this is out on Mono Mundo Recordings in Nashville, and this is also in 2496. And then finally, I wanted to shout out Cobuzz Fest. So Cobuzz Fest is our annual summer download sale. It runs for all of August. There are 10 days left. And I just wanted to shout out a couple of my favorite albums that are included in the selection. And it's a pretty massive selection, 20,000 titles. So it's great for digging through and coming up with, some of the albums are 80% off. So, it's worth taking a chance on. Going to kick off with Lou Reed's Transformer. This is his second solo album after leaving the Velvet Underground. I mean, it's a classic. What more can you say? It was produced by Bowie and Mick Ronson. And that right now is discounted at 30% off. Next up is Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace. So this is a live recording from January 1972 at the New Temple Missionary Baptist Church in Los Angeles. So it was also filmed under the direction of Sidney Pollack, but there were some massive syncing issues with the audio, so it was never released. It was really controversial. Aretha shut down any distribution or release every single time. But it actually finally found a theatrical release in November 2018, which is a few months after her passing. The director who took over got permission from the family. And this is just another showcase for her voice. And it's also great in accordance with the film because you can just really see her just giving, everything in her performance as she's sweating through her clothes and just, singing from the heart. Third, we have A Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm. So this is the 25th anniversary version of this album. But this year, it actually marked the 30th anniversary of this great debut from this group from Queens, New York. These guys mix, hip hop and jazz and rock, and it includes a sample of Lou Reed from Transform as well on the track I Kick It. And that's at 30% off. And fourth, we've got my favorite Pixies album. I mean, this is a classic everyone should own. Doolittle, we've got this in 16-bit. This is the second full length from the Boston band. Just full of really weird, twisted imagery and great surf guitar and just classic bass lines from Kim Deal. So check out Cobuzz Fest. That is our download sale. And pick up some music for your collection.
Sujan, thank you so much. We really we appreciate that. I'd like to bring attention to some of the actual prices as opposed to just 20-30% off, because that's 20 or 30% off what. If you go to Cobuzz.com, anyone, you don't have to be a member, you can buy these records from us, no matter if you're a member or not, and you can always buy them at a really good discount. The one you were just talking about, the Lou Reed. The Lou Reed you were just talking about is going right now in high resolution for $12.24. Any of you folks that have been doing high res for any amount of time at all know that is a crazy price. That's even cheaper than you could buy the CD originally for. Even off sale, it's only like $17.50. So the really cool, one of the really cool things I love about Qobuz is we give you the ability to support your artists by way of not only listening to music, but also downloading and buying it. These guys need a hand up, and I'm always pushing this because I'm really into artist support, and I think that any real music lover should be. So, go on Qobuz, buy this stuff. If you don't do that, go buy a t-shirt. Pull up their website, buy their album, hop in on a virtual concert that you can lend a hand with. But we got a whole bunch of people in the music industry that really could use our help. So if we all just do a little bit, I can't tell you how much that would mean as a whole to just the music industry. So Sujan, we love what you do. Thank you so much for the download.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you very soon, and then we'll have you on next week as well. So with that, let's bring back our guest, Bill Schnee, Bill Schnee Studios, Grammy Award winning producer and engineer for many, many years. We're going to start talking about some of the albums that Bill's done throughout the year that we were all introduced to Bill indirectly through his recordings. In fact, so many of these recordings that Bill had done, I started looking back over and I'm going, you did this one? You did this one too? Oh my God, I can't believe you did this one. I mean, and it just keeps going because the guy's got like 574 albums on your discography. Isn't that right, Bill?
I don't know.
Yeah, I stopped counting at like 300. Yeah, there's like 570 some odd recordings that Bill's got. He's had some hand in producing. So, thank you to begin with. But the first one I want to bring up right now is one that this was my first introduction to you. It's the pressure cooker. It's Thelma Houston's pressure cooker. I was saying earlier on, in the early 80s, you could not walk into any kind of a hi-fi shop, a high-end hi-fi shop, and not see at least one, if not more copies of this. And I think we all probably burned through quite a few copies. That's why I put this picture up there of the album, because that's the way that I was first introduced to it. This was before, CD really hit, right? And everyone always was in our world. We were all just grabbing albums that sounded decent, right? And this was like one of the ones that you would not get out of the shop without hearing, because you could really hear what the musicians had in mind. So Bill, tell us a little bit about this recording. You can hear it on Qobuz, and it is glorious. I sat and listened to the whole thing yesterday. Tell us a little bit about your experience with this one, Bill. This was early on.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the Lincoln Memorial Distinguished Column Volume 3 was 73, and that I engineered that one, and it was terrifying. 15. We got a big delay for some reason now. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I was astounded that in 3 days we had an album recorded, mixed, and mastered. And I went back to normal recording, and it was like slow motion. Everything was like in slow motion. I just couldn't believe it. I started thinking. About a year later, almost a year later, I went to Doug and I said, Doug, I want to produce a record, one of your direct-to-disc records, and I want to produce it, and I want to use a vocalist. And he said, what? And it took me about 2 weeks to convince him that it was okay. It took him 2 months to convince his partner, Lincoln Mayorga, because, as Lincoln pointed out, we're not really a record company. These have just been my records, doing my stuff. If we were going to do something like this, why would we trust some kid? How do you know he can do it? What about this? What about that? Whatever. 2 months, he talked him into it. A lot of stories with regard to that. Way too many to even begin to tell. But they're in the book that I've written. It'll be out next year. But so here I go. I finally got the green light to consider doing it. I'd only worked with 2 artists, 2 singers at that point that I knew could walk up to a microphone on the 3rd cut and deliver a vocal. And that was Barbra Streisand, who I had done 2 or 3 albums with by then, and Thelma Houston. So naturally, I started with Barbra Streisand, and I went to her manager, boyfriend, and hairdresser at the time, and I asked him. I got him on the phone, and it was like, this kid calling. I've just worked on the last 3 Barbra records, and I've got an independent company, and I would like to do an album of directed. It was sort of like, go away, kid, you're bothering me. So that was that. And then I had just done some vocals on Thelma Houston, who was signed to Motown. I was familiar with her because she did an album in '69, I think, one called Sun Shower that Jimmy Webb produced. He brought it to the world. Gorgeous album. And now she was on Motown. And I had just worked with her. So I had just done Marvin Gaye live for Motown. And I went to Suzanne DePass, who was a very gorgeous right-hand guy, and I told her my idea, and she thought it was intriguing. And so she talked to Thelma, and they agreed to do it. And we worked out a loan-out agreement, and made the record. And it was needless to say that the 90% of the time was well spent and spent well. It was a lot of work putting all the pieces together. In addition to, interesting thing is that little studio that I spoke about earlier that I recorded in, the LA Teens recorded in late '60s, was now called Producer's Workshop. And their console was a homemade console that sounded excellent, but didn't have enough inputs for what I wanted to do. And so the owner, a guy named Ed Cobb, worked for the company that owned it. He very graciously added to the console, had Bud Wyatt, a design engineer that had worked on the console, had Bud add 8 inputs to the console, and they built a isolation booth, because it's not a huge studio, and built an isolation booth that was big enough for Thelma and the 6 background singers that I wanted to use. And the band that I put together was absolute all-star at the time. I got the 2 best guitar players that I knew of, Dean Parks and Larry Carlton. I got, two best percussionists I knew, 2 best drummers, and I decided to go with the 2 drummers that had the most opposite feel. The one thing I noticed about the Mayorga records was that having the same rhythm section the whole way, it just kind of stayed in one place. So I got the Jim Gordon and Jim Keltner. Gordon always was a little on top of the beat, and Keltner was always a little bit behind the way they played. And so I had the 2 best drummers, an outstanding horn section. It was just, the room was packed, just completely packed. And
I can't imagine. I was thinking about this when I was listening to it yesterday. How many people? How many stations were there? There must. I don't even know how you could think about doing something like that.
2 percussion, 2 drums, bass, 2 pianos, 6 horns, and 6 background singers, and Thelma. And it's not a huge room. In fact, it's funny. The studio went out of business a long time ago. It had been taken over a couple of times, and now a young chap from Atlanta, funny enough, bought it about 6 years ago, and I hadn't seen it in a long time. And I went over there and took a look at it, and I looked in that room, and the room is almost identical to how it was in '75 when I did Thelma. Wow. And I couldn't believe, you talk about the idiocy of youth. If you asked me to put that same section together in there today, I'd say, "Are you crazy? I wouldn't dream of it. You could never do that. Are you nuts?"
You didn't know it couldn't happen, so you just went for it.
Yeah.
And it turned out amazing. So, folks, when you listen to this album, know that this is all done live, all direct to disc, and that is the hardest. That would be the hardest way to mix.
Yeah, yeah. Because the point being is that when you mix from tape or a computer, these days, every instrument has it's the same exact volume, it's the same exact tone, same exact dynamics. Same with the vocals, same exact everything. When you're mixing live like that, the singer is never going to sing it the same twice. The musicians are going to be somewhat similar, but not necessarily the same. And one takes off a little bit louder. I mean, it's a balancing act, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, balancing act with like 50 people. It's like, how do you do that? That's next to impossible. And we haven't gotten even to a third of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, but there's a couple of things that I'd like to ask you. You were one of the first guys that actually did digital recordings, and you had recounted a story to me that totally blew me away about recording. I think at that point, and I don't remember who the band was, but I remember you talking about recording simultaneously on a I think it was a big Studer machine, and then someone had done some kind of an ADD converter at 24. Was it 96 or 192?
192.
192. Can you take us through that if you don't mind?
Well, okay. So I was definitely not one of the first to go digital. I was one of the last. I just was not into early digital one little bit.
Early digital sucked. I mean, there were so many bad digital recordings.
Everything, yeah. Well, we learned so much. It was released too early, but whatever. But early 1644.1, as good as it is, it's not that good. I mean, we've now learned bit rate. We've now learned sampling rate. We now know that, in digital, it's, I said less is more in analog. Well, more is better in digital. And when I finally started doing Pro Tools, and I was late to the class, but when I finally started doing Pro Tools, and all I could do is try, and all I've ever done is try to make it sound as good as I possibly could. But as it's gone up, it's now, it's like I said, now it sounds quite good. A recording at 192.24 is stunning, absolutely stunning. Well, I was still mixing to analog tape from Pro Tools. And when tape became no longer available, I mean, you could buy it, but you'd go through a box of tape and you'd be lucky if you found, you do tones and it looked like a windshield wiper. Instead of sitting there at 1K, it's wagging. And so I started mixing to an SACD recorder, 1-bit, Ed Meitner converter. And Doug Sachs, my third mentor, always was, there was something about 1-bit that bothered him. It didn't bother me, but he suggested one day, he said, why don't you go back to PCM at 192? And I went, I got to, and this is quite a while ago, before there were as many converters as there are now for 192. And I said, oh, great, now I got to go out looking for that, huh? Because I was pretty happy with the Meitner converter on 1-bit. But his design engineer at the time, Josh Florian, I mentioned to him what Doug had said, and he came back to me a week later and said, there is a topology that the industry has given up on that I think was a mistake to give up on. And I think if I build a converter that's only for 24 192, that I think it could be great. So I commissioned him and he did it. So the next album I mixed it both to 192 with his converter and 1-bit with Meitner's converter. Took it to Doug, blindfold, that one, and we both picked, every time we picked Josh's. The 1-bit was good, the 192 was gooder. And so Doug, at the end of that session, mastering that album, he said, you should see how good this really is. You should go into your studio, the highest resolution you can get is a live room with live musicians, and see how good it really is. And before that, like in the analog days, if there was a band playing out in the studio, I'm listening through the glass, as we call it, They come in for a playback. I rewind the tape and hit play. Do I hear what I just heard through the glass? No, close. It's added a lot of things. It's added its own sound. Analog has a sound. It added its sound. It again, the top end, low end, depending on what speed you're at, the noise, the distortions, the different things. And that's the best that analog tape is ever going to sound. If you put that tape away and don't play it, bring it back in 30 days, it doesn't sound as good. And it's just been sitting there. And I'll never forget, we had a meeting with the people at Scotch in the 70s about that and told them that what was happening. And they said, that is impossible. And they started giving all this technical reason why that couldn't happen. And then 2 years later, they released their new tape, and the advertising slogan was better retentivity. Anyway, I wanted to do what Doug had suggested. So I got some guys, I got some of Sergio Mendez's band who I'd been working with mixing, and they came in and I recorded them. And for the first time, going from through the glass to the throughput of the digital, there was absolutely no difference in sound. Now, when digital promised the world, it didn't deliver it. There's no way that Nyquist at where it ended up could be good enough. Everything, we learned it finally. So yes, having extended on both ends is a wonderful thing, and now we have it 24-192, and so to me it's finally what digital always promised, without any artifacts. 1644-1 had artifacts. They have to filter the top when you get to the top. The filtering doesn't sound good. There's a million reasons. Well, maybe not a million. There's quite a few reasons why. But for me, 24-192 is gorgeous. It's just absolutely what came through the glass was perfect.
Yeah, there's so many. I wanted to talk about this a little bit because in the how do I put this? In the audiophile world, you have, just like you do with almost any technical industry, if one post will go up and then 10 people will agree with it, and then 20 people will tell you why that's theoretically not true. Like, I see all of these posts like, well, 24-192 makes no difference because it doesn't really matter because it's so above the capabilities of anything it's playing back. And while I would agree with that, if we were talking purely theoretical, the way I look at it is these are tools that are given to a skilled recording engineer, and now you actually have some semblance of headroom. If you're recording 1644, there are some really good 1644 albums out. You've got some on Qobuz. I think Steely Dan, Asia. We've just got in 1644. But this thing sounds absolutely amazing. I find that most recording engineers can't make stuff sound that great in 1644. You're one of them. Cookie Marenko is one of them. And then there's, a few dozen others. But for the most part, we're limiting someone with a skill set like you've got to 1644. It kind of almost ties your hands behind your back in some ways.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's I love the stuff that you've got in high res, but I gotta say, even your 16-bit stuff sounds really good, because you were dealing with a lot of stuff, like in the 70s and really part of the 80s, that this was really before digital was taking hold. We had been mixing in analog for close to 100 years at that point. And then all of a sudden, digital comes out. It's a brand new thing. There's no wonder why it would take, a few years to start understanding how that medium would be recorded the best way.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, is that from the time we got analog from the Germans, it really didn't change all that much. We figured out, how better emulsions on the tape. We figured out, better circuits on the recorder and different things like that. But it basically was, whereas digital, I mean, it's still, it's still the same concept, but now we've improved everything, including.
Well, the things that were tough for analog were, it's almost opposite, right? Because the things that were really, really tough for analog, like heavy bottom end, is typically, not real easy from an analog playback standpoint. But it's super easy for digital to do bottom end with like no problems at all. And then before with higher end extension, now digital has finally gotten to the point that that's not a harsh thing or a bad thing. It's just a wispy thing. It's great for decay and room identification, right? I mean, it's just gotten so much better over the years. There's a couple of albums that we did get to that if you don't, do you mind if we continue going, Bill?
Oh, please.
Great. So folks, we said this was going to be an hour. So if you got to go, we certainly understand, but Bill and I are going to keep going. And then I'm even going to ask him back on another show and we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. But before you go, I do want to mention one thing that Bill we talked a tiny bit about a book that's going to be coming out. It's going to be called Chairman at the Board, which I thought was a totally brilliant name for the board or for the book. I was saying Chairman of the Board for a while. Bill's going, no, it's Chairman at the Board, but I cannot wait for this to come out. I know for at least me, it's going to be a total page turner. And when it starts getting a little closer to the release date, as Bill said, Amazon, really everybody with the COVID pandemic has seen a lot of delays. This has been one of them. So when this does start to be released, you can bet that on Streaming Music Matters and on Qobuz, we're going to be promoting this book quite heavily because people just have got the wrong idea, especially so many of us audiophiles. We think that 24/192 was for us. I'm going, no, we get the benefit of it, but really it's for the recording engineers. They have so much more headroom and they can do such a much better job given these tools that are available to them now, these digital tools that are available to them now. You're still there, right? You didn't lock up.
Nope.
Oh, good. So let's continue with this. There's another album. There's another couple of albums that you did that still today, when I put either one of these albums up, I have tons of people. I go, oh man, I love that album. It sounds so fantastic. The recording was unbelievable. This is actually pull up the other one first, Neetha. There you go. How about that? Asia. Bill, this was a recording masterpiece. Even by today's standards, you pull this thing up and there's just like you're going, the recording is unbelievable. Obviously the music is fantastic. These guys are killer musicians. It must have been incredible working with them, but the actual album sounds fantastic on vinyl, and it sounds fantastic on digital. Tell us a little bit about working with these guys.
Okay. Well, by now, at this point, I was that studio where I did Thelma, Producer's Workshop with the homemade console. It was my favorite place. And Gary Katz, who produced Steely Dan, called me up and asked if I would like to record the next album. I said, oh, sure, absolutely. And he said, now it's going to be a revolving door of drummers, just so you know. And I said, okay, fine. And he asked me, where would you like to work? And I said, well, my favorite studio is a kind of funky little place on Hollywood Boulevard called Producer's Workshop. And I don't know if he or the boys went and never took a look at it until the first day of the session. But yeah, it was, what can you say? When you, about a band, the musicians are so important to music. Boy, does that sound brilliant. You've got, in that room, you've got the best musicians in recording musicians in the world,
Who was the first drummer?
Uh,
that popped in? Do you remember?
no, I don't remember the first. No.
Who was the most fun one that you worked with on that album?
Well, there, I don't know that any were fun. I mean, fun. I mean, obviously, I was the most excited. Here's a cute story. I was the most excited about getting Steve Gadd.
Yeah, that's who I was really getting to.
Because I'd heard him on 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
Oh,
and
that sounds so easy, and that is such a tough drum. That is such a tough drum part.
Snare thing, yeah. And so when he came in and we did. I think he was only there 2 days, and we did four songs. The world has only heard 2 of them. I think the third one is on in some form is on YouTube. Somebody's pinched it. Those second engineers when everyone goes home. I don't know. Anyway, the point is at the end of the first day, I was just blown away by this guy, what he played. And I called Richard Perry, who was a very famous record producer through the 70s and 80s, that I did a lot of work with. Did Ringo albums with him and Carly Simon and whatnot. I said, Richard, this Steve Gadd is a monster. We got him in here, and it's just incredible. Blah, blah, blah. He said, do you think I could do a session with him? And I said, well, I don't know. We start at 2:00 tomorrow. I suppose you could do a 10. But let me call Gary. I called Gary Katz and said, what do you think? And Gary was very respectful of Richard. And he said, okay, sure, but just make sure he gets done, because Richard was known for taking a lot of time, hundreds of takes and everything, and he was really afraid. He said, the guys will kill me if you go over. So I said, I'll tell him. So Richard, you have to come here because I've got a drum sound I'm very happy with. I don't want to lose it. So, because he had his own recording studio at the time. And so he was doing an album at the time with Leo Sayer. And so he popped over with Leo the next morning, and with a good portion of the same band, and went in, and I met Leo. I'd never met him. And we cut You Make Me Feel Like Dancing that morning. Not many people know that. And if you listen to that drag snare, it should sound on You Make Me Feel Like Dancing. It should sound pretty familiar. We cut it in absolutely miraculously unheard of time of 2.5 hours with Richard Perry. And he asked if we could do another one. And I said, Richard, we can't go over. And we won't, I promise. And we did I think, ran it down and did 2 takes of the second song, which was called How Much Love, which was the next single after You Make Me Feel Like Dancing on Leo's album. So it was pretty wild.
Man, what incredible stories that you've got. Neetha, while we're sort of saying goodbye, I'd like to just run through a few of Bill's albums. You can throw them up on stage. I want everyone to know that on Qobuz you can listen to Bill's playlist that he put up for us. And it is just fantastic. You'll go through this as you're going through this thing. If you've got any age on you whatsoever, you'll go, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did this one. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he did this one. Oh my gosh, I can't. There's just so many, and they're just we just have a huge privilege talking with someone like you. This is Bill's playlist on Qobuz. If you're not a member of Qobuz, you can actually still listen to this thing. We've got a 30-day free trial. And I'm super upset, Bill, that we have kind of come to the end of our hour by 10 minutes, and there's about half the stuff I wanted to talk to you about we just didn't get to. Folks, as far as your questions go, thank you so much. There are so many great questions out here. We'll answer these as we're over the next 2 or 3 days, so that you can check back and take a look, and we'll have these done for you. But because I wanted to talk about the record label as well, that we never did really get around to, because Bill has got a project that has started, and I'm super, super interested in seeing it through to the end. So maybe we can even add a little bit about the label and what you're trying to accomplish going into the future. Bill, would you grace us with your presence again?
Sure.
Man,
Sure.
thank you so much. I mean, your time is super, super valuable, and I don't want you to think that we're taking advantage of you. Thank you so much for being with us today. I've had some very, very interesting people on this show. We've had no one that could even hold a candle to what you're talking about, because really almost everybody that we've had on the show, we're there to play your stuff back, or in our case, to deliver the stuff that you've done. In your case, the just the whole building process, how this was done, your experiences, you don't have there's no other similar stories to that in the audio world, right? So thank you so much for all of the pleasure that you brought, for all of the work that you've done, and for what you continue to bring to the music industry.
Yeah, there's on billschnee.com, there's I just put up a site. I've never been into self-promotion, but I found myself now that I'm about to be an author, a published author, that I needed to do that. So I got someone to put a website together, and there's a tab on there called What's New, and it talks about the things that I'm working on now, and including some pretty amazing stuff.
My dog Max is chiming in. He's a big fan of yours as well. I can't believe it. Right outside of my door at the end of this thing, he starts on it. So, but yeah, go to billschnee.com. I went there for the first time not long ago, and it is an absolute fascinating website. It's got a ton of the albums that Bill has done. It just tells a little bit more about him. Even Wikipedia, when we first were getting acquainted, I was going to Wikipedia just to learn a little more about you. And it's just such a fascinating story. But yeah, be sure to visit billschnee.com. Be sure to pull up as many albums as you can of Bill's on Qobuz, and go to Qobuz and listen to Bill Schnee's playlist. All you have to do is, when you get into Qobuz, just type in Bill Schnee, and you'll go right to his play. You'll scroll down to the bottom where it says playlist, and you'll see his playlist right there. So, Bill, it's been a pleasure, my friend. We'll get together, and soon you need to, before the summer's over, you got to come down and let's do a kayak trip.
As soon as it's legal.
Sounds good, buddy. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us.